welcome to the Everybody Has a podcast. I'm really excited to show off our first episode with Jon Eggleton. We'll get to that in a second. But first of all, I want to direct you to our description of this video where you can find links to our Patreon. Would really love you if you can support the podcast through that. Or please get in touch. I have the email down below as well, how to get in touch with us for a potential sponsorship opportunities. Again, this is the first episode of the Everybody Has a podcast. We plan to launch, more than one a week. I mean, I think we just disrupted our distribution schedule a little bit, so we're gonna do a little more frequent posting. So right now you're gonna see our first episode, which is 30 minutes long with Jon Eggleton. Now we're gonna have some other cutting room floor interview bits on the Patreon page. We're going to keep our episodes on YouTube to about 30-ish minutes, but we did talk to Jon for about 40 minutes. So you'll see some other clips on the other end of the Patreon. So please consider joining us there. As I said, something we love to do. And like I said, we're going to be releasing a few episodes a month. Maybe even more, up to like 6 or 7 episodes a month. So we get a lot of content out there for your monthly contribution. So now let's turn to our first episode. Jon Eggleton is somebody who I met in Des Moines, Iowa, probably like 12 some odd years ago. He was a marketing guy there who was pushing his business. When I asked for people who wanted to come on the podcast, he was one of the first to raise his hand and support what I'm trying to do. So I'm very happy to chat with him, and I'm glad we did chat because we did have a really good discussion. Now we're going to hear today. Like I said, this podcast is going to try to go all over the place when it comes to topic of discussion. So one thing we do have in common is our support for startups. We do enjoy contributing to any sort of successful startup, trying to help entrepreneurs learn. So he is part of a location called the Hatchery in Atlanta, which is essentially an incubator for small companies, and he's there as a resident. And so we talked a little bit about his role there, what it's like to teach entrepreneurs, kind of the ups and downs, because it's the reality of startups and entrepreneurship. We also talked about non-alcoholic beer. Now, one thing that I love about Jon that I learned is that he also is creating a podcast, creating content, as I'm trying to do here. But his is revolving around non-alcoholic beer aficionados, and just entrepreneurs in the space, brewers in the space. And so we talk a little bit about what it's been like for him to get that rolling. And also, again, links in the description to some of his projects that you can go check out if you have an interest. And finally, we also, two people being close in age, we talked a little bit about just the age of technology we grew up in and where we are now, and just the leaps and bounds that we've seen over the years to just see the advancement. We were mature in our early 20s, pre-internet age, and so we've spent 20 some odd years, post-internet. And so I think that does put us as people in our age group in a unique position of kind of really appreciating what it is. But anyway, we talked a little bit about that and why we are so into technology and continue to use it in our everyday lives. And finally, I'm going to do something on every podcast, which I think illustrates my whole idea of that everybody has a podcast. And I asked him what his favorite podcast was. And you're going to see which one he chose. Spoiler alert, you look in the description, you'll find a link to it. And sit back, watch this episode. We have it broken down in chapters, so feel free to jump from chapter to chapter, or watch it all the way through, or put it in your background of your as you're going through your day. We are going to be putting this on the audio podcast platforms as well. But for now, enjoy the Everybody Has a Podcast. And once again, I'll remind you, the Patreon is down there. If you want a sponsorship, the email's down there. But without further ado, I present to you Jon Eggleton, our chat about just life in general. So hello, everybody, and welcome to the Everybody Has a Podcast. My name is Marco Santana, and today I'm joined by someone that I almost would call him like a blast from the past, right? John, we met back when I worked at the Des Moines Register in the early 2010s, I believe, when you were doing, what were you doing now? Marketing, right? Trying to promote some of the companies that you work for. And like I said before, like I promise myself not to have any marketers on here because as the journalist that I understand the agenda, I understand the game, but I didn't want anyone here hawking things. But you have an interesting, however, background when it comes to not just marketing with your niche, but also some of the side projects you're doing. So welcome to the show. First of all, good to see you again.
Yeah, Marco, thanks for having me.
And let's jump into one thing real quick. The marketing side of things, it gets a bad rap. I think there are. I try to tell people whenever I talk to marketers, some people they do it right, and I appreciate the ones who do it right. Others, I used to joke around like there'd be people just coming out of college who would just put their first less initial and then put the word marketing after it and act like they have trust me, I was very blunt, and I really shouldn't have been that way, but that's okay. It's my podcast now; I can say whatever I want.
That's right.
But John, John, talk to me a little bit about just about marketing and especially the healthcare industry because I think they have so many compelling stories to tell, uh, and a lot of times it's kind of hard to let them figure out what the good stories are when it comes to healthcare, hospital system, marketing, stuff like that. Can you talk about that industry a little bit?
Sure. No, that's very true. And my background, as you know, is retail and e-commerce. So when I
Mhm.
first started doing this 6 or 7 years ago, and we started working with healthcare organizations, it was still very early stage, I think, in a lot of them finding their voice and really how to talk to their patients. And I think a lot of things have changed since then. Certainly, technology has, and they're all focused on how they can leverage AI and what's appropriate and what's not appropriate. But it's always been an industry that's really, I think there's a true holding back from a HIPAA and patient privacy perspective. That's
Right.
certainly very relevant and something they all have to worry about for good reason. But I also think it's been a little bit of a perception issue as well, where I feel like it has stifled innovation in the past with healthcare. And I think with millennials in particular getting now to that stage where they're having to go to the doctors more often, or maybe they're helping their elderly parents go to the doctor and navigate that process. I think it's really pushed the entire industry to think differently about how they need to message themselves, creating a better patient experience. I mean, I'm in my late 40s. I think people my age and older have just sort of accepted that going to the doctor is not going to be
Right.
a necessarily pleasant experience, but it doesn't have to be. And I think that's definitely changing. And the role of marketing to help tell that story as it happens, as you see it already in retail and
Right.
CPG and other industries, I think is just in the early stages, which is exciting.
We were the generation. I'm going to pat ourselves on the back here for a second. That really embraced technology. So we had half our lives without it and half our lives with it. If you get my meaning.
That's
Um,
right.
and so like nowadays you see all these these great technological advances when it comes to AI. I mean, hell, AR, VR, XR, all the R's, and just all these technologies just impacting all these industries. How have you been able to, from a marketing perspective, kind of um, sell clients or sell people you talk to on the importance of implementing these new technologies? Because it's not an easy sell sometimes.
No, it's very true, and I think it starts with, as you were mentioning, the storytelling aspect.
Mm.
And I think if you look at the medical industry, especially surgeons, similar to maybe lawyers and other professions, you see a lot. There's been a lot of billboard advertising where you have outdoor advertising has been a
Mm-hmm.
staple of that market for a long time. And I think it's difficult to get people past that and understanding that there are different ways to build an awareness and different
Yeah.
ways to build connection. And so a lot of it starts with us just trying to stress the importance of the creative. So not creating something that's flat and static, but something that's more engaging, something that tells that emotional story of what that experience might look like. And that,
Right.
depending on the provider, might include showing videos of what the facility looks like, an interview with some of the doctors. Obviously, with patient privacy issues, you can't really interview patients on there, but you can
Right.
really tell that story about what people can expect. And I think just getting people to wrap their minds around that and a different way to build that connection and hopefully a long-term relationship with that patient is so important.
You are hanging out. Are you in Atlanta proper?
I, I am, yeah. Well, not in Atlanta proper, just outside in Decatur.
Okay. Well, we're talking about because one thing that people know me for is I'm a big technology. I like to say I'm the dumb guy who writes about smart people. Where like I think the tech scene is a lot of very innovative, interesting people, and I'm not dumb, of course, but I can't. But I could not program anything if you asked me to, right? Put a gun in my head. But you know, one thing that I've loved to see is a lot more metro areas embracing technology, embracing startups, embracing kind of cutting edge technology, cutting edge innovators, entrepreneurs. Atlanta has a tech scene. I was informed by you, but no, it does not surprise me. Talk me a little bit about that. You are working as a resident. Explain to me the hatchery. Right? Explain to me that a little bit.
Sure. So right, I'm an innovator in residence for the summer cohort at the Hatchery, which sounds like a mouthful. It's affiliated with, it's part of Emory University,
Right.
and one of the cool things there, it's a business incubator. It's not attached to any particular college within the university, so it's not with the business school, it's not with the medical school.
Okay.
It's a resource and a formal program that helps prepare it really helps student founders create ideas. And there's folks in there who are literally in the first initial weeks and months of trying to
Right.
come up with an idea. They don't really even have a necessarily a name or a business plan yet. So the program helps them with that. There's other folks who are a lot further along who may already have an idea, a proof of concept. Some even have their MVP, their minimally viable product out there, and they're even getting some customers on that. So it's really great to see the mix. I mean, because it's not attached to a college, there's there's ventures in there that range from being involved with healthcare, of course,
Right.
to theology.
Mm.
So there's just quite the range, and some are more focused on nonprofits, which has been nice to see. You think of the startup world as people think about, I need to build a company I can sell and make a lot of money, and there's nothing
Right.
wrong with that. But it's also nice to see the nonprofit angle to that. But it's been fun just to be engaged with that community. I've always enjoyed the startup community, and it's a way for me to be involved and kind of give back and obviously be associated with some really smart people. You want to talk about people that are smarter than me. I sit in those rooms with these, I'll call them kids because I am in my late
Right. Right.
40s and
Right.
most of them are early 20s and, already working on their first company. And that's pretty inspiring, I think. So that, I think is a great program here.
How long have you been involved with the hatchery?
For probably about 2 years or so.
When you see startups, I mean, we all know the statistics, the failure rate versus the rate of success. Obviously, I don't know the exact number now, but it used to be 90 to 10, right? I think it's changed. I think it's gone up a little bit in the recent years when it comes to actual data. But when you're advising startups, how tough is it, or how real do you have to be with them, right? When you want to encourage, especially at the college level, student entrepreneurship, right? They have entrepreneurship. I teach high school kids journalism, so I understand the whole nature type or nurture part of the nurturing thing. But there's also the reality of like you have to get it right because 9 times out of 10, these startups are going to not exist in a couple of years. I mean, how difficult is that, or do you just kind of keep it positive and encouraging?
It's a great question. I would
Yeah.
I would say the way I would answer that is I view my role as being more, and you talked about journalism, almost being a journalist with them, where I'm asking the questions. So it's not my role to say this is a good idea or a bad idea because for the most part I really don't know if it is or it isn't. I have my guesses on which ones I think could really be something big and which ones may struggle. So certainly I'm always happy to share good or bad, my thoughts on that. But I think if I'm doing my role right, it's more of asking them the right questions. Are you thinking about this? Who do you think is going to be your core customer? And also I would say many of them, it's very easy to focus on what it is I'm trying to do and how I can do it, and really falling in love with the product. I was at a conference recently where a successful entrepreneur here in Atlanta, a guy named David Cummings, said, you need to not fall in love with the solution. You need to fall in love with the
Hmm.
problem.
Right.
So I think trying to get that across and really just help them apply some critical thinking to what they're doing, and let them come to that conclusion, whether it's the right idea or not, or whether they need to pivot or not. And those can be things that happen over time.
Yeah, I think, and it's funny because I would bet you that if I talk to somebody in any ecosystem, they're very similar, right? When it comes to there's an entrepreneurial. I think this generation has an entrepreneurial spirit. There are a lot of,
For
and
sure.
not to mention because the opportunities are there, the barrier of entry are a lot lower than they've ever been. I mean, you can start a business with your phone, with your phone and internet
No,
connection, right? Um, can you talk to me a little bit about just the evolution over time, right? Like you said, we're both mid to late 40s. I've been in the tech scene for 15 plus years. You have probably longer than that. But can you talk a little bit about just what you've seen over the years when it comes to entrepreneurship, the popularity of entrepreneurship, and how this next generation is really embracing it as a solution to some very big problems.
no, 100% agree. 100% agree with you there. It's a totally different mindset. It's become, I hate to use the word commoditized, but it has
Right.
become a lot easier. I look at my own experience. I first tried to get into entrepreneurship about 12 or 13 years ago. I started an e-commerce retail site called Lexalo,
Mm.
which was really it was focused on lighting. And even back then, the tools to build an e-commerce site, to market my site, to things like the things that exist today in social media and Instagram and that free earned media side just look totally different, which isn't to say that it's easy to build those things today. But I think just in terms of there's a whole new set of tools that are available to the youth of today and for younger
Right.
people of today to get into that. But you talked about the mindset, and I do want to comment on that as well. It is a mindset shift. And I don't know if it's because I grew up in the Midwest. I'm originally from
Mm.
Ohio, and I was sort of raised in the, hey, work hard, get a job at a good company, prove yourself, and things will work out. And there's nothing wrong with that approach, and people still have that approach to some extent today. But
Right.
you're right. I think there's a different mindset in people, regardless of where they live in the country. They don't have to, have a parent, or they don't have to have grown up in the Bay Area or New York to start a company anymore. And that hasn't been true for years. And I think it's especially true now. And
Right.
so people are really just thinking differently about their future. And I love the fact that so many of these students are not thinking about going and working for somebody right off the bat. They're looking
Hmm.
at starting a company. And what better time to take a risk than when you're, that new in your career, you don't have a family or kids yet, if that's the direction you're going to go. So
Right.
they should go for it.
I'm going to say the old man thing. If I knew then what I know now.
Right. 100%.
One of the things that you had mentioned that you're working on is, and it's funny because I think I'm going to say this tongue in cheek, but non-alcoholic brewing. Like, I mean, why? I mean, like,
Who knew?
don't get who knew. So, talk about that. I love because you also are doing some podcast work with that. I love that you're just kind of like you're kind of like me. You just have a bunch of projects in mind, and you say, you know what, let's do it, right, and see how it goes. Talk to me about. I mean, did you ever were you ever a brewer? Or is this just an interest of yours, or do you just see a market for it? Talk about that a little bit. It's called
Right.
Nation, right?
Right. Nation Beer.
Yeah.
And you're right. So it's relatively new, a new project of mine. Started it about a year or so ago, and as I may have alluded to before, I went through a health event a couple of years ago. I had a few surgeries over the course of 18 months, and certainly it was nothing life threatening, thankfully, but it really did recalibrate my definition of health. And one of those things I started to look at cutting out was cutting out alcohol, and
Right.
not completely, but just making, just really being more mindful of when and why I was drinking. And it was around that time that I first saw some athletic beer on the shelf, which,
Hmm.
if you're familiar at all with the category, you probably know that label, even though they still have a ways to go in terms of their own brand awareness. But it was probably two or three times of me seeing it on the shelf at my beer store and finally deciding to buy it that I started drinking it, thought it was great, and realized there's this whole explosion in the craft beer scene and non-alcoholic beer that's very similar to the craft beer scene overall from 20 to 25 years ago. And
Right.
it's a category that for years was dominated by the likes of O'Doul's,
Right.
which is
Right.
not a very good, which is, they're still around, but not a very good association, not really about taste. It was all about a substitute product.
Right.
And NA beer has come along. And so in terms of my interest there, I started Nation Beer is really a digital content platform to promote the category, to talk about the category. I started the accompanying podcast called US of NA back in January, and I've been interviewing
Mm.
non-alcoholic brewery founders, influencers who are in the marketplace, regular
Right.
breweries who have gotten into it, and just telling their stories. And it's been really interesting. And I don't know exactly where that might go. I have some thoughts. I'd really love to
Yeah.
get involved with helping the category grow and offering some B2B services to layer onto that as well. And we're in a position to, of course, with my marketing background, to be able to, for us to do
Right.
that, first and foremost. But yeah, it's a really exciting category, a lot of growth happening, and technology plays a role there as well. I was
Wow.
not a brewer, to answer that question, but
Okay.
there's new yeasts and new technology that has really allowed the flavor profiles of non-alcoholic beer to take off.
Well, I think I know I read somewhere, but I forgot when it was, but that there are actual, like, I don't want to say a number, but there are a lot of non-alcoholic bars opening up. Like, there's a lot of kind of bars here and there. I think we might have tried one here in Orlando.
For sure. No, they're definitely opening up around the country. And I think, the last couple of years, the media around dry January, usually when a lot of
Right.
people are thinking about cutting back or eliminating drinking for a period of time, is when you see a lot of exposure for them. But
Right.
there are dry bars and dry bottle shops in most of the major cities at this point. Here in Atlanta, we actually have two. And so I think that's going to be a big piece of it. It already is. It's a big part of the education process. So I become friendly with the two that are in my area, Zero Co and Soberish, and I've been in their shops and seen the consumer come in, and it's an interesting process because people come into the store, they want to know all about the category, they've got lots of
Mm.
questions, and
Right.
so there's a huge educational component to it, and how are these made, and what's the process behind them. But it's definitely, you want to talk about an entrepreneurial area, it's
Right.
niche, but it's definitely out there and growing very quickly. And the future of NA drinks in general is very much tied to Generation Z. They're just not drinking in the same numbers.
Right.
Millennials are drinking less than Gen X, which I'm a part of, and so it's a whole mind shift towards more healthy, conscious living. And doesn't mean cutting out alcohol. It is for some, but for many, including myself, it's really just about moderation. So it's really been interesting to be a part of that.
That's fascinating to me because like you said, I think I've noticed more in the recent years that fewer people there's more of an awareness. I don't feel like there's more of an awareness of the effects rather than just not drinking because they don't like it. I think that there's a lot more awareness for the younger generation when it comes to the effects of the effects of smoking. Like maybe honestly, maybe that whole not anti-smoking campaign of the '90s finally paid off here 30 years later when you're seeing these warnings on every cigarette pack. Remember back in the day when they first started that, and I was like, "What are you
Right.
doing? What's that all about?" But now it seems like there's a lot more awareness and acceptance of that whole. It used to be you go to a bar, you come home smelling like smoke, no questions asked.
Right. You just
Not
accepted it.
right now you don't, and also you go there and there's no alcohol either. What is happening, John? We're flipping the whole society's flipping on us.
Well, yeah, and real quick, I would say we were talking earlier about the younger generation embracing entrepreneurship and
Right.
technology since they've never known a world that doesn't have all this technology. And I think not drinking or drinking less is all part of that. They just
Yeah.
don't have the same social patterns and behaviors. It's not like you have to go to a bar, a traditional bar, if you don't want to, or
Right.
if you do, you don't necessarily have to drink an alcoholic drink. You can find one of these great tasting NA beverages as well. So it's all part of the same thing. It's just a different mindset, a different way to socialize and look at the world.
I think one thing that you mentioned that I think is interesting because is trying. I'll use your terminology for it was to avoid becoming a technology dinosaur. Um, I like that because I'm very lucky, right? Somebody at my age, and I'm 47, so at my age, I spent the last 15 years writing about technology. That means anybody who wants to get coverage of their emerging technology, in my two ecosystems I was at, they would reach out to me. So I would learn about new technology before others. But that's not inherent to people our age usually, right? I mean, how do you kind of keep? I almost feel like as an entrepreneur, you almost have to, right? But
Right.
when you look at the technology, how it's advancing, I forgot what it's called. What was that law where like technology doubles every
Oh,
2 years?
right.
But that has been so that is so
Yeah. We're
much
past that.
much faster by a lot. Yeah. Talk to me about just kind of the your experience as someone who's followed tech for a while, just seeing the growth of technology. It's insane, man. I tell you what, just to put it as bluntly as I can, like what the hell? What the hell's next?
Right.
Yeah.
No, it's very true. It has infiltrated all aspects of life and industry. When we were just talking about one example, you wouldn't think of the beverage or beer space being about technology, but
Right.
NA beer is having its moment, and NA drinks are having their moment in part due to technology. So it's impacting everything. I think the best example of what you just described, which you're spot on, there is a fear. I think in particular of people that are, I don't know, I don't want to draw a line in the sand, but let's say over 40,
Yeah.
who probably worry a little bit more about that becoming a dinosaur, what they could do to avoid that. And I think you see that most clearly today with AI.
Hmm.
And there's a lot of panic over, well, is this going to replace my job, my business, my career? And I think, the better question is, how can it help me in my career and
Right.
in my job, my business? And we're seeing there's been a lot of good, I think, media pieces on that in recent months around, we really need to look at AI as a companion versus a replacement to what I do. It's what's going to help us be better. But to that broader question, yeah, I think just the embracing of technology and everything and how it touches everything, it's impossible to get away from it. I remember the first thinking, my kids now are middle school going into high
Hmm.
school age, but when they were 2 or 3 years old, I very clearly remember my son walking over to, kind of waddling over to the television in our living room and trying to touch the screen and move things around because he just assumed it was a touch screen because everything
Right.
else was. And
Right.
it kind of blew my mind in the moment. Like, why would he think that's a touch screen? But why wouldn't he think it's a touch
Right.
screen? So, as people who have grown up only in that world, it's natural that that's how they're going to view the world, and that's how younger people that's how they view a lot of their social scene. A lot of that is not just through social media, but just in texting and connecting and virtual gaming and all those things. And it is it's an exciting, if not maybe a little bit scary time to be alive for all those things.
Yeah.
But I think we should worry less about becoming a dinosaur and just enjoy the moment, enjoy the technology, allow ourselves to maybe be uncomfortable a bit
Yeah.
and try different things and just be open minded to it all.
I think one thing, the way I approach it is like, as a writer, for example, I know there a lot of people come to me like, don't are you afraid your job's gonna be taken over because AI can do this or that? And I'm like, listen, here's the thing. If it's gonna happen, it's gonna happen. I have to be a part of it in order to thrive, right? I can't just sit and put my fingers in my ears and say la la la. I mean, it's not happening. It's coming whether I like it or not. I'm one person. I'm not going to stop it if I didn't like it. But at the same time, it's a matter of how can you make. I feel like people who have already existing skills, whatever it may be, this is going to enhance their skills, right? It's going to take some of the planning away out of it. It's going to take some of. I don't know. I just feel like AI and things like that. I'm excited because I think it does have the ability to make create opportunities for people, right? I think for
Right.
me anyway, I'm that I think that's the way you have to look at things. Really, technology is going to advance whether you like it or not. It always has.
Right. No, I think to your point, I think the question isn't, is this going to replace me or replace my skills, but it's figuring out how are my skills transferable in this new world. and certainly things like journalism and writing, and that's part of what I do, and it's personal to me as well. So I'm in the same boat as you and thinking about
Hmm.
that. But using AI to help on research and to brainstorm ideas, I think can be a very powerful thing, and to be able to enhance that. So I think you know not trying to focus on when and how it's going to replace, because to your point, that's going to happen. If that's going to happen, it will regardless. But
Right.
how you can better harness the technology and be better at what you do. And I do think that human connection is always going to be important, whether it's in
Yeah.
writing or any written or communication style. So that's not that shouldn't go completely away. It's just how can we use technology to make that even better.
Yeah, and I think the bottom line is you have to be confident in yourself, right? Like I do believe I can beat a robot when it comes to when it comes to capturing emotion, etc. It's a matter of like finding the people who value that, right? So there is
Right.
that whole side of everything. Now, this podcast is called the Everybody Has a podcast for a reason, right? And that is because now that I've started a podcast, I believe everybody has. So
Mhm.
how I built this with Guy Raz, right? One thing that I'm trying to include here is a chance for people to just talk about, the podcasts that they are listening to or that they admire. Talk about that, just that format, like how I built this. Because I see that it's basically let's talk to an entrepreneur or let's
Right.
talk to, and a lot of the times I like those because my favorite thing about these kinds of things is it's an illustration that everybody has a different story, but they all, I mean, even if you all get the same place of success, the story is always different. It winds all over the place.
Right. Yeah. So real quick, for those who aren't familiar,
Yeah.
as Marco mentioned, it typically features an entrepreneur, and they tell their story and kind of go into, those different pivot points, and, when, when were they on their last dollar? When did they realize this might be something, which for many of them it comes later than you might think. I mean, a lot of them are aiming a lot
Yeah.
lower than where their trajectory eventually took them. Um, but and more recently, so I would just to give why I love the podcast so much. That particular one is not only does it tell the stories, they've more recently been doing these things called advice lines,
Yeah.
or these episodes called advice lines, where they bring back an entrepreneur who's been featured. And I think if anybody of your listeners who really loves the entrepreneurial scene, especially
Hmm.
anything in CPG or business to consumer, which seems to be where a lot of them are coming from, they'll have a founder, like they had the guy from who started Cliff Bar. They had the
Right.
woman who started Swell, the water bottles, and just a whole range, Sunbum. So just a whole range of all these consumer products that many of
Right.
us are familiar with. And they come back and they typically talk with three people who have a specific business question, whether it's about funding, whether it's about marketing, whether it's about, are they at a pivot point? What should they do next? And it's always fascinating to see the advice that comes out of that. And I'm also struck by just how humble people are, both
Right.
the entrepreneurs who have been invited back because they've been, by any business measure, extremely successful, and many of them have sold the companies and are now serving on various boards and whatnot. And just they're very humble in how they talk about how they got to where they were. And it was, maybe it may have been a combination of luck, with them just having an
Hmm.
intuition around something. And it's just very energizing to me. And even if I have nothing to do or nothing in common with the people on that show, whether it's a single entrepreneur telling their story or it's
Right.
the advice line, I always walk away with something that I hadn't thought about before. Like, oh, I should really think about that for my social media, or,
Right.
that's really interesting, from a production standpoint. At what point did they ask a certain question? And it may be an industry that I knew very little about beforehand. So I think just having some of that depth of knowledge, but I highly recommend it for anybody who's entrepreneurial minded, who's kind of an entrepreneur geek like I
Right.
am,
Right.
and
Right.
like I think you probably are as well.
Yeah.
So
Absolutely.
it's definitely worth a listen. They're pretty quick listens too, as well.
Listen, man. Like I said, my journalism career. Yeah, I say it tongue in cheek. I'm a dumb guy talking to smart people, but the reality of it is, I met a lot of really interesting people over the time, and just kind of learning. And to me, it was about their story. It was about the unifying thing, which is, um, uh, you know, just challenges, right? Adversity, all of these things that you have to overcome. And I met people who had to get divorced because they couldn't handle the stress. So that's why I used to say, like, listen, here's the thing. I used to say, hey, if you failed, that's who I want to talk to. because otherwise, basically people outside of entrepreneurship, all they read about is these fantastic funding stories. They think entrepreneurship is easy, and it's not easy, not even close to being easy. So, um, John, I appreciate you being on the show. For this last 35, 40 minutes. Where can people find you? Obviously, we can all find each other on LinkedIn, but you also have a LinkedIn page for Nation, right? The non-alcoholic beverage brand as well. Obviously, when I post this on YouTube, whatever, I'll put all the links up below. But can you tell people where they can find you and figure out what you're doing?
Sure. So the easiest way would just be website. So Traktion Partners, and it's Traktion with a K. Partners.com is our healthcare marketing firm. And then nationbeer.com is the non-alcoholic beer site. So those are probably the easiest ways. You could also find both of those as well as me on LinkedIn. And Instagram is nation_beer for the Nation Beer site. So yeah, no, this has been a lot of fun, Marco. I really appreciate the invite to be on the show. Yeah. And, this has been a lot of fun.
I appreciate you. I appreciate the time. And for everyone else out there, this has been Everybody Has a Podcast, where we chat, you listen, and hopefully we both laugh. So we'll talk to you soon. And John, once again, thank you.
Thank you.